At the airport, Dad sneered, "She can't even afford economy." My stepsister laughed, boarding first class. I stayed silent until a pilot approached. "Your private jet is ready." Everyone went still. The rumble of luggage wheels against polished concrete filled Terminal 5 like the sound of distant thunder. "Move it, Jessica." My father's voice cut through the crowd, sharp and unforgiving. "You're slowing everyone down. Again." Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're from and which city you're watching our videos from. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what you would do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I pressed my lips together and stepped aside as my stepsister Vanessa glided past me, her expensive heels clicking against the floor like a warning. She flipped her platinum blonde hair over one shoulder and shot me a look dripping with contempt. "Maybe she's overwhelmed," Vanessa said, loud enough for nearby travelers to hear. "This is probably her first time seeing an airport terminal this nice." My father, William Thornton, actually laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, hearty laugh that made heads turn. "She can't even afford economy, Vanessa. Don't expect her to understand how premium travel works." The laughter that followed felt like needles pricking my skin. A businessman glanced over, smirking. A mother with 2 children whispered something to her husband. Heat flooded my face, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I adjusted the worn strap of my canvas backpack and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows where jets gleamed like silver birds against the morning sky. They were flying first class to Chicago for some family celebration, one I'd been invited to but never actually welcomed at. Vanessa waved her boarding pass in the air like a trophy. "First class boarding, Daddy. We'll have mimosas before the wheels even leave the ground." "Enjoy," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Don't be jealous, Jessica. Some people just make smarter choices in life." That one landed hard. Because 3 years ago, I had made a choice. I'd walked away from my father's real estate empire after he married a woman barely 7 years older than me and handed her daughter, Vanessa, everything I'd helped build. The properties I'd researched. The deals I'd negotiated. The late nights I'd spent reviewing contracts while he was out partying. Now they stood there, designer luggage surrounding them like a fortress, while I clutched a single suitcase with a broken wheel and tried to look invisible. "Do us a favor," my father said, lowering his voice but not enough. "Try not to embarrass the family name. People notice these things." I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. "People always notice, Dad. It's what they remember later that actually matters." Before he could respond, the overhead speaker crackled to life, announcing boarding for Flight 847 to Chicago. They gathered their matching leather bags and headed toward the gate, Vanessa's perfume lingering behind them like an expensive insult. She turned back one last time, smirking over her shoulder. "See you in coach, Jessica. If you can scrape together the fare." Their laughter echoed as they disappeared down the jetway. I stood there, my chest tight but my face calm. Around me, the airport pulsed with life. Families embracing. Business travelers checking phones. Children chasing each other around waiting area chairs. Then a shadow fell across the polished floor. Black leather boots. Military shine. A tall man in a crisp navy uniform stopped directly in front of me. His posture was parade ground perfect, his voice professional but warm. "Miss Thornton." My father's laughter still floated faintly from the gate area. "Yes?" I said, confused. The officer straightened even more, if that was possible. "Your aircraft is ready. We can begin pre-flight checks whenever you're prepared to board." The words cut through the terminal noise like a lightning strike. My father stopped mid-stride. Vanessa froze beside him, one hand still raised to wave at someone. Their faces drained of color as dozens of travelers stopped to stare. I blinked once, slowly, then allowed myself a small smile. Perfect timing. I was getting tired of standing around. Gasps rippled through the crowd like dominoes falling. The officer gestured toward a corridor marked Private Aviation, beyond the main security checkpoint. Through the windows, I could see a sleek black Mercedes SUV waiting near a private hangar. Vanessa's mouth actually fell open. "Aircraft? Her?" The officer nodded politely. Yes, Miss Thornton owns it. I turned to meet my father's shocked stare. His face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching panic. You were right about one thing, Dad, I said quietly. I can't afford economy. I paused, letting the moment stretch. It's too cramped for me these days. Then I turned and walked away, my old backpack suddenly feeling lighter with every step. The glass doors opened automatically, and warm air rushed in from the tarmac. Wind caught my hair as the low hum of jet engines filled my ears. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel small. I felt untouchable. The door of the Gulfstream G650 closed behind me with a whisper, sealing out the chaos and judgment of the main terminal. The scent of leather and fresh coffee replaced the cheap cologne and mockery I'd just left behind. Welcome aboard, Miss Thornton, said Captain Reynolds, the officer who'd found me. He was smiling now, the kind of genuine smile that comes from respect rather than obligation. Your flight plan to Chicago is filed. We'll have you there 2 hours before their commercial flight lands. I sank into a cream-colored leather seat by the window as the engines came alive beneath me. The city spread out below like a story I'd already finished reading and had no intention of revisiting. As the jet began taxiing toward the runway, my phone buzzed. Dad flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Jessica. His voice was sharp, confused, almost angry. What kind of game are you playing? No game, I replied, my voice steady and cool. I just stopped playing by your rules. I told you to be practical, he snapped. Instead you ran off chasing some fantasy. Fantasy. I leaned back in my seat, watching ground crews scatter as we approached the runway. I built the company you're still coasting on, Dad. The one I helped design before you handed my position to Vanessa. Silence. Then his voice dropped lower, almost dangerous. You could have stayed, Jessica. You didn't have to walk out. I stared out the window, remembering that night 3 years ago. The shouting match in his office. The betrayal when he'd announced Vanessa as the new director of acquisitions, my position. The way he'd handed her my project files like I'd never existed. You're right, I said softly. I didn't have to leave. I chose to. The line went dead. Captain Reynolds appeared beside my seat, setting a leather folder on the table. Your itinerary. Meeting with the venture capital group at the Windsor Hotel, 3 o'clock. Your security detail will be waiting at the private terminal. Thank you, I said, not opening the folder yet. He hesitated. If I may say so, it's not often we see someone reclaim everything they lost. I smiled faintly. I'm not reclaiming anything, Captain. I'm becoming the person they said I'd never be. The engines roared, and the plane lifted smoothly, powerfully, defiantly into the sky. I watched clouds swallow the ground below, my reflection ghostly in the window glass. 3 years ago, I'd walked out of my father's office with nothing but a laptop, a handful of industry contacts, and a promise to myself that I'd never beg anyone for an opportunity again. While Vanessa posted endless photos of luxury vacations and designer shopping trips, I worked 80-hour weeks. I taught myself advanced property analytics. I built financial models in coffee shops and hotel lobbies. I pitched investors who laughed at my age and my gender and my lack of family backing. When the first investment group rejected me, I found another. When the bank denied my business loan, I sold my car and took the bus. When everything felt impossible, I remembered standing in my father's office while he told me, "You'll never make it on your own. You need the Thornton name." But I did make it. That silly idea he'd mocked, a technology platform called Thornton Analytics that used artificial intelligence to predict real estate market trends, had become a global solution worth $300 million. Every insult, every rejection, every door slammed in my face had forged the woman sitting on this private jet. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. The Chicago media has been calling. Word got out that you'll be attending the National Property Summit tonight. Do you want to make a statement? I glanced at my phone. Another message from my father, just 2 words this time. How, Jessica? I typed back, by becoming everything you said I couldn't be. Then I pressed send. The jet climbed higher, sunlight flooding the cabin in gold. My reflection looked older now, calmer, stronger. For years, I'd let them define me as the quiet daughter, the forgotten child, the one who wasn't quite good enough for the family legacy. But tonight, when I landed in Chicago, that same family would be at the summit I was keynoting. They just didn't know it yet. I smiled as the city skyline began emerging through the clouds ahead. The real takeoff hadn't happened in the air. It had started the day I walked away from them. The Gulfstream's wheels touched down with barely a whisper, Chicago's skyline glittering ahead like a challenge I was ready to meet. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Tonight wasn't just business. It was closure. Captain Reynolds escorted me down the private terminal stairs to a waiting black Escalade. The moment the tinted door closed, my assistant Natalie turned from the front seat, tablet glowing in her hands. Everything's set, Jessica. The National Property Summit begins in 90 minutes. You'll deliver the opening keynote as the primary sponsor. Perfect, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart raced. And the guest list? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Natalie smiled knowingly. William Thornton and his daughter confirmed attendance this morning. Of course they did. My father never passed up a chance for publicity and networking. What he didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that Thornton Analytics wasn't just sponsoring the summit. We'd acquired the entire event organization last month. As the Escalade glided through downtown streets, I caught glimpses of digital billboards flashing my company's logo, electric blue against midnight black. 3 years ago, I was the invisible daughter. Tonight, I was the headline. When we pulled up to the glass-covered convention center, camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Reporters crowded the red carpet entrance, shouting questions. I stepped out wearing a tailored navy suit, not designer label, but confident, elegant, mine. A journalist pushed forward. Miss Thornton. Is it true Thornton Analytics acquired the National Summit organization? I met her gaze and smiled slightly. Let's just say I prefer owning the places I was once denied access to. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors. Conversations hummed with that particular energy of power, money, and ambition, the same world that had once laughed me out of its rooms. And then I saw them. Across the grand hall, my father stood deep in conversation with a group of developers. His wife, polished and perfect, stood beside him. Vanessa hovered nearby in a scarlet gown, laughing too loud, trying too hard to be noticed. They hadn't seen me yet. Miss Thornton, an announcer called from the stage. Please welcome tonight's opening keynote speaker and summit sponsor, the CEO of Thornton Analytics. The crowd applauded. My father turned toward the stage, clapping politely. Then he froze. The spotlight hit my face. Recognition slammed into his expression like a physical blow. Vanessa's champagne glass nearly slipped from her hand. Jessica, she whispered, loud enough for people nearby to hear. I smiled calmly and walked toward the stage, my heels silent on the carpet. Good evening, everyone. My voice carried through the hall, amplified and clear. 3 years ago, I was told I didn't belong in rooms like this. Tonight, my company owns the room. Light laughter rippled through the audience, impressed, intrigued. But I wasn't joking. I looked directly at my father as I continued. I built Thornton Analytics from a single laptop in a studio apartment. No inheritance. No family investment. Just determination and the memory of being told I wasn't good enough. Vanessa's face twisted with something between anger and disbelief. People often ask what motivates success, I said, my voice steady and strong. For me, it was simple. Humiliation is a far better teacher than privilege ever was. Applause rose, scattered at first, then building to something genuine and powerful. My father's hands remained frozen mid-clap, his expression unreadable. After the speech, as crowds mingled and networked, he approached slowly, cautiously, like someone crossing enemy territory. Jessica. He stopped a few feet away. I didn't know you'd become so successful. No, I interrupted gently but firmly. You didn't. You were too busy celebrating my replacement. Vanessa stepped forward, forcing a smile. Look, we didn't mean. You meant every word, I said quietly. At the airport. At the office. Every time you laughed at what you thought was my failure. But here's what you forgot. I paused. Some of us rebuild in silence. My father looked at the floor, his confidence crumbling. You're still my daughter. I nodded slowly. Yes. Just not the one you raised. Around us, the event continued. Business partners approached to shake my hand. Journalists requested interviews. Investors wanted meetings. My father stood there, lost in the lights and noise, watching the hierarchy shift beneath his feet. Tonight, I hadn't just won. I'd rewritten the entire story. And they were forced to watch it happen. The night had softened to quiet music and low conversations. Investors toasted deals. Journalists typed on phones. But at the center of the grand ballroom, William Thornton stood alone, watching the daughter he dismissed now command every spotlight in sight. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their silence was enough. Natalie approached with sparkling water. The media wants a closing statement before we wrap. I took the glass, my eyes still on my father across the room. Let them wait. Vanessa stood beside him, her red lipstick smudged, her confidence shattered. She whispered something urgent, but William didn't respond. His expression had changed, less arrogance, more disbelief, maybe even regret. When I finally crossed the room toward them, conversations dimmed. He straightened his jacket, trying to recover old dignity. Jessica, he said quietly, I should have known. You were always brilliant. I just didn't think that I could succeed without you. I finished, my voice calm. You made that very clear. He exhaled heavily. I said things I regret. No, I replied, setting my glass on a nearby table. You said things that built me. His tired eyes met mine. You could have told me what you were building. We could have worked together. I smiled faintly. You taught me that working with you meant losing myself. I didn't walk away to punish you, Dad. I walked away to remember who I was. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice shaky but defiant. Come on, Jessica. Don't act like some hero. You got lucky with investors. That's all. I turned to her, still smiling. Luck doesn't sustain a company for 3 years straight. And investors don't fund ideas, they fund belief. Something you've never had in anyone but yourself. Her face hardened. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said softly. It makes me free. Behind me, the announcer called for closing remarks. Natalie gestured toward the stage. But I raised a hand. One moment. I looked back at my father, my voice dropping to something softer, more real. You know what hurt most? It wasn't losing my position in the company. It was realizing my own family only valued me when I was convenient. He swallowed hard. You're right. I failed you. For a moment, I almost believed his sincerity. Almost. But some apologies arrived too late to change anything. So instead of bitterness, I offered something he didn't expect. Grace. I forgive you, I said quietly. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I've carried that weight long enough. He blinked, stunned. Jessica. I stepped back, glancing at the glowing banner above the stage. Thornton Analytics, building tomorrow's solutions. You were right about one thing, Dad, I said, smiling softly. I couldn't afford economy. I was never meant to fly that low. I turned and walked back toward the stage. The spotlight found me, cameras rolled, and applause thundered through the hall as I delivered the closing speech. I spoke about resilience, about rebuilding, about how being underestimated becomes the greatest training ground for success. But as I spoke, I saw my father and Vanessa near the exit, watching in silence as the crowd stood for me. The daughter they'd mocked, now leading an empire. When the applause finally faded, I stepped off stage, my heart calm. Natalie handed me my coat and whispered, You did it. I looked back once more toward the doors where my father stood, smaller somehow than I remembered. No, I said. I just stopped letting them define what success meant. Outside, the city shimmered with 10,000 lights. My Gulfstream waited on the private strip, engines humming softly in the darkness. As I climbed aboard, Captain Reynolds saluted. Back to San Francisco. I smiled. Home. Wherever that really is now. And as the plane rose through the clouds, I thought of that morning at the airport, the laughter, the humiliation, the shame that had burned through me. Now, miles above them all, I finally understood. Some farewells aren't spoken with words. They're written in altitude.